Hi, and welcome to my little spot and podunk. Today, I'm going to share with you this cute little table runner that I made. The pattern was inspired by this fabric right here, and I'll drop a picture in. I was at Walmart buying sewing machine needles and saw this fabric and the little spiders and the bats, and it mixed in with the calico. I just thought it was too cute because I'm a girl of the 70s. I had a lot of calico clothing, so it spoke to my heart, and I bought it. I thought, well, while I'm here, I might as well go ahead and find some matching fabrics. So I got the black and the plaid, and I'll put pictures in here as well. But this is a really versatile pattern. You don't have to put it, you don't have to make it in dark colors or fall colors. It would be great in spring or quilt of valor, um, whatever your palette is. But I'll put some color inspiration in here as I continue talking. Now, as I made these, I was ended up with a lot of scraps, so I decided to go ahead and make pillows at the very end. It wasn't planned, but might as well use those scraps up instead of having to deal with them later. So I will also include the pillow pattern in this tutorial. What I will not include is how to do the binding and how to do the envelope closure backing. I will do 2 more videos in the next week on how I do my machine binding and how you can do an envelope closure backing on any pillow. I'll give you the math and show you how to do it. So let's get started making our table runner. First thing we're going to do is cut out our fabric for our stars. Here's our stars. So we're going to be cutting out the background fabrics that are kind of like shaded. That's what this fabric is. And I'm cutting it with the wrong side up because these small prints make me kind of dizzy. But it's going to take 2 fat quarters or a half yard of fabric. Either will do. I'm using fat quarters because this was an impulse buy. I saw them and I thought, oh, that's cute. I'm going to buy it. But a half yard of fabric would work just as well. So first thing I want to do is square up this edge of the fat quarter. Now my fat quarter is the 22 by 18. So I'm cutting along the long side of the fat quarter. Just trimming it up. So we get a nice straight cut. Okay, then I'm going to make 2 6.5-inch cuts. One 3.5-inch cut. I've layered together my 2 6.5-inch cuts, and again I'm going to square up the edge. I need a total of 16 6.5 by 3.5-inch rectangles, but we're not going to be able to get them all out of this fat quarter. We're going to have to use the second fat quarter to get 16. So out of those 2 strips, I got 12 6.5 by 3.5, but we're going to need more. From this 3.5, we're going to cut 3 more. 2, 3. So we're still going to need 1 more from the next fat quarter. Okay, I'm going to square up my fat quarter on the side. We'll cut 1 3.5-inch strip and 1 4.5-inch strip and 3 2-inch strips. From the 3.5-inch strip, we're going to cut 1 6.5-inch by 3.5-inch piece, and that will finish off our 3.5 by 6.5. So this will be scrap. This is my 4.5-inch strip. I'm going to trim it up, cut 4 4.5-inch squares. And this is scrap. From the 2-inch strip, we need to cut 10 2-inch squares. You'll have a small piece of scrap from one strip. The last 2 strips will not be cut. For the star points, we're going to need 2 fat quarters. Again, I'm going to turn them over. It just makes it easier to see with the ruler. From the first fat quarter, we're going to cut 30 3.5 inch squares. Okay, I got my 30-inch squares, 3.3 or 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares from that first fat quarter. From the second fat quarter, I'm going to need to cut 2 more 3.5 inch squares. So I'm going to cut one 3.5 inch strip. Then I'm going to cut a 6.5 inch strip and a 4.5 inch strip. Now I'm going to cut my 2 3.5 inch squares. And this is scrap. From the 6.5 inch strip, we're going to cut 8 1.5 inch strips. And this is scrap. From the 4.5 inch strip, we're going to cut 8 1.5 inch strips. And this is scrap. Okay, I purchased 2 yards of background fabric because I plan on using it for the back of the table runner also, but we'll see. I've got a lot of little scraps going on over here, so I may incorporate these little scraps into the backing. So what we're going to need from the background fabric is 3 3.5 inch strips by width of fabric. And 1 2-inch strip. I've layered these 2 of the 3.5 inch strips together, and I'm going to cut it into 3.5 inch squares. Okay, this was the end pieces to the strips that I just cut for the 3.5 inch squares, and I couldn't quite, this isn't quite 3.5 inches to cut 2 more, so I'm going to unfold it, layer them together, and cut 2 more 3.5 inch squares. You could press that if you want, but I'm not going to. It'll be just fine. So I'm going to get 2 more 3.5 inch squares. There's 1. There's 1, 2. Those are 3.5. And let's see if I can get 1 more. This one looks like it may actually work. Oh yeah, I've got another 3.5 inch square. So there's 1 more. Let's check this one out. I don't know, it's looking pretty wonky. Yeah, this one didn't make the cut, so we'll just set that off to the side. So now I've got 23 3.5 inch squares, and I need 32 total. So I need to cut 9 more from this strip. Okay, so I got my 9 out of that strip. Okay, now I need 16 2 by 3.5, and those will be the corners of the block. They'll fit up here, right here. I'm going to try to get as many as I can out of the strips that I had left over. So it needs to be 2 by 3.5. Turn this around, see how many I can get. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 6 of the 2 by 3.5, so I need 10 more. That means I'm going to have to cut another 2-inch strip from my yardage. All right, so that got me up to the 16 that I needed. So we just got this little piece of scrap, and we'll take it and throw it over in the scrap bins. Before we head over to the sewing machine, we need to do one more thing, and that is to draw a diagonal line on the back of all the 3.5-inch squares. All right, to draw those diagonal lines, for the white ones I just used a plain old pencil and a ruler and drew the diagonal line. But for my dark colored fabrics, I used this. This is called Tailor's Chalk. And this was actually gifted to me, and when I got it, I'm like, what am I going to do with that? But it has become a very handy tool. It's not something I use all the time, but in a situation like this, it comes in really handy. And on these black fabrics, it can be a little bit tricky finding something to mark. And I just use that edge, and you need to allow yourself a little bit of space, a little bit more space than you would with a pencil, and just draw that diagonal line. And I've never had any problems with this Tailor's Chalk coming out, so that's a plus. Anyway, that's it. Okay, I've laid out all my pieces off to the side here at my sewing machine, and the first thing we're going to work on is the center square. This is a 4.5 inch square, and 2 4.5 by 1.5 inch square or rectangles. We're just going to sew those to the side, each side like that. I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Let's pull that off there. Okay, now we're just going to press those seams out. You can iron if you like. I'm just not I don't like to iron, but you do what works best for you. And then we're going to add the 1.5 by 6.5 to the top and the bottom. And we're going to open this up, press those seams, and you should have a 6.5 inch square. So continue making the other 4. Next, we're going to make our star points, and to do that, we're going to need one of the 6.5 by 3.5 inch rectangles and 2 of the 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares. We're just going to place this right on the end, line it up, and sew directly on that line. Now I'm going to change my presser foot out to an open toe foot. I'm putting that right down the center. You don't have to, but I just like to do that. You don't even have to have an open toe foot as long as you can see what you're doing to sew directly on that line. Okay, I'm going to line it up with this end. Just put it on there, make sure it matches, and just sew directly on that line. Now this is an extra step that I'm going to do, but you don't have to do because I want to make this half square triangle over here. What I'm going to do is sew another line. I'm flipping it around and sewing an extra line down the side. That way I'll have a half square triangle that I can add to my half square triangle stash. I'm just lining up the edge of the foot with that line. All right, now we want to go in and cut a 1/4 inch away from where we sewed on the line. Okay, now I have an extra 1/2 square triangle for another project. Okay, then we're going to press this open like this. Nope. I think we'll press this seam open. Let's press this seam open. Now, if you don't mind a lot of bulk, you don't have to press this open. If you're one of those that always presses to the dark, then by all means press to the dark. But I'm going to press it open. So the next one we're going to put on there, on top, line it up the same way. Make sure that diagonal is coming down into the corner, just like this one. And stitch on the line. Oops. And I'm going to swing that around and do the same thing, stitch a 1/4 inch away, or about a 1/2 inch away from that line. Now remember, this step is optional. You don't have to do that. You can just throw those in the trash if you like. Okay, then I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from the first line that we stitched. And press that seam towards, press it out towards the white. And then you should have something that looks like this. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing but with the black, but we're going to make sure that it's going the opposite direction. Okay, so there's our white. And we've sewed that way. This time we're going to sew from this point, to the center of the bottom of that triangle. So right on that line, again, and again, I'm going to flip this around and sew another seam. Okay, we're going to cut, make sure you're cutting on the outside, don't cut on this side. We're going to cut a 1/4 inch away. And then press this open. Nope, I think I'm going to press to the black. Okay, we'll just grab another one and do the same thing. Make sure that it's coming down into the center. And then again, we're going to cut a 1/4 inch away from that line. Now let me show you what we've got when we cut that apart. Isn't that a cute little block? I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it sure is cute. Okay, then we're going to press this out towards the black. Now this should measure 3.5 by 6.5, and you'll want to square it up if needed. So that'll be our top star point, and you'll want to go ahead and finish the rest of them exactly the same. Okay, now that we've finished sewing all the units together, we still have, you should have 2 pieces of the orange and black fabric and 1 piece of white fabric. 2 inches wide by width of fabric, and these were cut from the fat quarters, and they're 2 inches wide as well. And we're just going to sew these together. Okay, when you get to the close to the end of that one, then you're going to line up the next one and leave about 1/8 of an inch or so in between it, the 2 different strips. From this strip, we're going to cut 16 2-inch sections, but first we need to square this off. Cut those savages off the end, and then cut 16 2-inch squares. And what that will do, we'll make a little 2 patch, and we're going to press it towards the orange fabric. A little shortcut would be to cut off this end as well. Then layer these, fold it in half, and you can cut 2 patches at a time. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. And then this is just scrap. And we'll press all of them. Okay, now we need to make this corner unit. So we need to grab the 2-inch by 3.5-inch rectangles that we cut earlier and our little 2 patches that we made, and we're going to sew them together like this. I like putting this one set over here and one set over there. That way I can just grab them and put them together. And I'm going to put the 2 patch on top, and I'm also going to pin each one of these. Once you get them sewn together, just press them towards the solid and continue until they're all done. Okay, now that we've got all of our corner pieces put together, we'll just turn them till they're facing the inside. The first thing I'm going to do is to flip that over on top of that and sew it together. There's no seams or anything to nest, so it should be a fairly easy sew. Press out. Okay, I got that top one done, and I pressed both of these seams outward, press them out, and now I'm going to sew this row together, and I will press the seams inward. Okay, I sewed both of those on there, and I'm going to take them and press them towards that center square. And we'll do the bottom the same way. Okay, I'm going to sew the bottom row the same way that I did the top row and press it out. Okay, I got that bottom row sewed together. Now I'm going to sew the top and the bottom to the center. Nest those seams, match them up, and pin them. Okay, I've got those sewn together and I'm going to press towards the center of the block and continue assembling the other blocks until they're all four complete, and then we'll work on putting the table runner together. Okay, now that we've gotten our blocks all finished, we need to sash them. And for my sashing, I chose a plaid. Now the thing about plaids is that they don't print very well, and when I say very well, they don't print straight. They're all over the place. You can try to just cut this out, and eventually you're going to run into a problem. You may be good for a few inches, but it's going to just keep going cockeyed. So I like to put my plaids on the diagonal. I couldn't find any that was printed on the diagonal, so I'm going to have to do it myself, which means making bias cuts. Now I'm going to drop some pictures in here to show you the difference with how it looks. All I did was fold up these fat quarters around the block and then put those cornerstones in there that we still need to use. So as you can see, it makes a big difference. You can cut yours however you want, but I'm going to tell you that it's going to take 2 fat quarters or a half a yard. The choice is really yours. But if you can find it, if you can find a plaid or a gingham that's printed on the diagonal, that would be great. You know, makes it a lot easier to sew. I have starched these fabrics because that helps to control that stretchy when we cut on the diagonal. So I bought 2 extra fat quarters just in case. I didn't know what I was going to make with these when I bought them. I just knew that I loved these fabrics, so I bought a bunch. So in order to figure out how many we can get out of 1 fat quarter, and I'm going to turn this over because it's really hard on my eyes, so I'm assuming that it's hard on your eyes too to see those stripes. What I did was, I know that the sashings are 12.5 by 2.5, so I just got my 12.5 ruler and tried to line up that center diagonal with the plaid to make it straight, and then I'll take my ruler and set it right there to make my first cut. I'll move this out of the way. That way I know that I'm going to get 12 inches of fabric. Okay, so this becomes scrap that you can use for a binding or in another quilt. Now it's just a matter of working our way down, and we'll turn this sideways, and working our way across this, cutting 2-inch strips. There's one. We're going to need 13. Now at this point, because it's getting so long, I can actually fold this in half, make sure that this stays straight, and give this a little press. Make sure that that's a rotary cutter. I almost hit that. That could have been a mess. Okay. So we're going to pull it down here, give it a press. As long as this is lined up, we're good to go. And we're going to cut 2-inch strips. There's 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, we're at the center. That's the center mark. So we're only going to get probably 2 more strips out of here. And a good way to know is to take that corner piece and lay it right there. See? We could have put that there originally. And that will let us know that we can't cut any farther than that. We're not going to get any more strips from this fat quarter. Yep, we're not going to get any more. So this is all scrap. Now, we're also going to have a bunch of scrap here. I'm sorry, but that's just the way that it is. But it's the price you have to pay to have what you want. the biased or the on point fabric. So I'm just going to layer these up 4 at a time. Now I'm going to get my 12.5-inch ruler and cut these to 12.5 inches long. Now I want both of these, I'm going to line these up so I can cut both at the same time. You just want to cut right past this little angled area. Make sure you're not going to get a bunch of salvage. You can get a little bit, but not a whole bunch. Okay, so now I'm going to take the 12.5-inch ruler, set it on there. I want a line on the bottom and trim it. 12.5 inches. And I don't think we're going to get any more. So all this becomes scrap binding or put it in a scrappy quilt. It's kind of wasteful, but it's not wasteful if you're like me and you keep your scraps. So let's see how many we got. We've got, there's 4 and there's 3, there's 7. So we need 6 more. So we're going to need 1 more fat quarter. We'll do the same thing with the next fat quarter. Okay, now we have our sashing strips. Okay, we're going to start sewing the sashing together, and what I've done is I've got 4 strips here, 4 strips here, and then I have a cornerstone on each end, and then there's 4 cornerstones down here, each one, and also this part all together, and then this reminds me that I've got to have a cornerstone down at the very end for this. See, here's our cornerstones. So that's what we're sewing together, are these 2 strips, and then we'll come in and sew these together. Okay, I'm just going to grab these and start feeding them through the sewing machine. Okay, I'm going to press them towards the sashing. Put them in piles of 4. All right, so we're just going to start sewing them together again, pulling from the piles, and pull it over like this and flip this one over on top. That will leave us the end to put that one little square that we had over on the other end, the cornerstone. So we'll just line them up again and feed them through there. Now because this is so long, I'm just going to pick this up right here, bring it over and grab this one again and put it right on top. And I'll do that again. Grab that top one, bring it over, grab this one, and put it right on top. Okay, now we can do this again with the very first one in that we put on the very bottom. Just bring it around and grab that square over here and put it on top, and that row of sashing will be done. Okay, and we'll do the second pile the same way. Okay, now I'm just going to grab my blocks from back here and start putting the sashing on them as well. Now, I don't square up my blocks. I try to be as accurate as I possibly can when I sew, but if you need to square up your blocks, then do so. But I'm going to pin these together because, you know, there may be like 1/8 of an inch or so that's off on the blocks, but you can ease it in. Let's see how this one's going to do. This one's pretty good. You know, it's laying pretty flat. I'm not pulling on that. So I'm just going to pin at the top. You know, I'm going to pin at the both sides here, and that's it. And I do readjust because sometimes can you see how that gets off right there? I'll just pull that up and push it over to make sure the two edges of that fabric are meeting. And you'll see my hands get really close up here, and what I'm doing is making sure that seam stays down. I know that scares a lot of people, that my fingers get so close, and yes, I have sewn over my finger once or twice, maybe more, but that's just the way I'm used to sewing. I've done this for so long. And I do also occasionally run over some pins. You probably just saw that. So I'll just pick up the next sashing piece, flip over onto the block, and pick it up and pin it. Okay, let's see how that one looks. That one's pretty good. It's got a little bit of bag to it. Do you see how I'm having to pull it to get those to line up together? So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to pin it right in the middle. And you can see that there's a little bit of bag in that one, a little bit of extra fabric in this block. Can you see that on each side right there? There's a, So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew this one with the block down. And when you do that, it will ease in any extra fabric that may be in your block. If it were a bunch, I would trim it off, but it's not enough for me to have to worry about that trimming. So now I can just kind of give the fabric a little pull right here, and it'll make it lay flat and ease all that in. I've heard this called baggy bottoms. You put your baggy bottom, you put your baggy on the bottom, the fabric that's baggy. That's how I always remembered it. I'm just going to run right over that pin. Now it's not suggested that you do that, but I do it anyway, and sometimes they bend on me. And we'll grab the next one. Do the same thing. A friend of mine the other day said, she says, your quilts always look so perfect. She says, I wish I could piece as perfectly as you. And it's like, you know, I don't piece perfectly, and I don't believe that any quilter really does. I told her, I said, you know, the true measure of a quilter isn't by how perfect her quilts, but how well she hides her mistakes. And that's just the way that it is. It's part of the process. Nobody has perfect quilts, but you learn over time to get better at it. But you also learn that getting better means learning to hide your mistakes. Cut our sashings apart. Now, if you're new to my channel and you haven't watched too many of my videos, I have a video for this little thing right here. This is called the Blade Saver. I did a review on it, and I also have a code for 20% off the rest of this year, which is 2021. But it's a handy little tool that I absolutely love. And it uses a rotary cutter blade that we would normally discard. So we're just going to go through and press the ones that towards the sashing that haven't been pressed yet. Okay, so we're going to press these out towards the sashing also. Okay, and we're just going to pull it over here and flip one on top. Okay, I'm going to have this zoom in just a little bit because I wanted to show you guys this and I forgot. So right here you can see my fabric sticking out, that bottom fabric, and that's because my flying geese was just a little bit off. I'm actually going to cut this so you guys can see it. Okay, right there. My flying geese was a little bit off, so I'm going to match up this and let this hang out a little bit. Nobody's going to know. It's going to be inside the seam. And press towards the sashing. All right, I think we might be able to flip this around. Let's see. Oh, I think we can do it. Just flip it around there and put that on there. We don't have to cut the thread. That's all the better, right? And press that towards the sashing once again. And now we're going to add our long sashing strips. Doesn't matter which, they're both exactly the same. And I'm going to pin at every intersection. And nest those seams. If there's a beginner watching this, it's like, what is nesting seams? This right here is nesting seams. We've buttoned those two intersections up against each other to try to get a perfect point. Does it always work? No, but most of the time it does. But we can kind of pull our fingers, you know, I'm pushing or pulling my thumb this way and pushing my finger that way, kind of trying to push them together. You see how they slide together? That's called nesting the I'm going to do that at each intersection. And again, press toward the sashing. And our runner is done. Now all we have to do is quilt it. All right, now that we've got our table runner done, we've got all these little scrap pieces left from trimming the blocks. So what we're going to do is make a tool to trim these up, because we've got a diagonal line and then a partial diagonal line. Now, if you have a 2.5 inch square that's cut or has an X in it, you could use that. But for most people, we don't have one of those. I have one, but I'm going to show you how to make your own to trim these up. Of course, with the half square triangle, you can just trim it up as normal. I also have a video that shows how to make a locking half square triangle ruler. I will link it below. But using tape, you can make your own locking half square triangle, cut around the edges, then just take it and turn it, slide it down, and cut the other two edges. But for this project, we're going to need some Scotch tape or some type of clear tape, a black Sharpie marker, a rotary cutter for cutting paper or the tape actually, and then another rotary cutter for cutting your little triangle units. So first thing we're going to do is to find our 2.5 inch mark on any ruler will work. I'm using a 6.5 inch ruler, but any ruler will work. So there's our 2.5 inch. So what we're going to do is get a piece of tape that will fit all the way across there, and make sure that it covers up that 2.5 inch mark. Okay. And the rotary cutter is so you can trim that tape off of there. I use this for paper only. You can see it says paper only. I'm just going to trim that tape off and get rid of it. Now we'll move our paper back over here so you can see what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do is take another ruler. Any ruler will work, but I'm going to use this one because it's handy. And I'm going to put it right at the tip of the 2.5 inch mark. Let's get my Sharpie. And I'm going to draw a line from each one of those, from this 2.5 inch mark to the other. And you'll want to line it up because you want it to be as accurate as possible. So, but if you mess it up, you know, it's just tape. You can get another piece, take it off and put another piece of tape on there. So I've drawn my line, so I've got an X right there at the 2.5 inch mark. Now you want to make sure that that's dry before you go putting it on your fabric. So what I'm going to do is run my finger across it, and it is dry. So now we can trim up this block here. Let's get rid of the paper. And the first line that I want to trim up You just line it up. You want to line it up with this seam first, and then line up this one. You may have to do a little wiggling, and it may not be perfect, but I think that's pretty good. What do you think? You see this line's lined up, and this line is lined up with that seam. Fairly good. Oops, wrong one. So then we're just going to trim the outside of this. And then turn it around and do the same thing. Line it up with that smaller seam first, and then line it up here. It can be a little tricky, and if this one isn't perfect, if you're having to get a little off down here, that's okay, because it being off here doesn't matter. It matters how it looks out here on the edge. So let me see if I can, that looks pretty good. So we'll trim it. See how it's off right here? But it's not going to matter. What matters is that out here, it's on that line. So now I can trim it. And we have our perfectly trimmed at 2.5 inch. I think this is called a shaded half square triangle. All right, now we can get these trimmed and make our pillow. After we trim up all of our little units, we'll have a stack of shaded half square triangles that look like this, one that looks like this, and then we'll have half square triangles. These are different. No matter how you turn them, they're not going to match up and be the same. They're just like mirror images of one another. So if you lay them out like this, it's going to make laying out the pillow top a lot easier. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to pick up 2 of these because, and I'm going to turn them around like this. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to turn this whole stack around because I think there's more of them like this than there is anything else. So I'm going to put those up there. So then the next one, we want these orange squares or triangles to match up like this. And then we're just going to take it and turn it around and put it right beside it. And then we'll need another set like this, which means we're just going to pull it off the pile exactly like that and put it up here. And then we'll need a half square triangle on each end pointing out. So each side is identical to this one. So what I'm going to do is build each side, the outer square first, just like I'm putting together a puzzle. Like that. So right now would be a good time to pause and take a screenshot of this so you'll have it for later. Or if you're making your quilt along with me, watching the video, you'll want to pause it so you can lay out your block. Okay, what I'm going to do is move this over to my sewing machine. So I'm going to pick them up in stacks like this. I'm going to move this pillow, and I'm going to put those stacks on my board so I can take them over to my sewing machine. Okay, now I can take these over to my sewing machine. Before I go over to my sewing machine, I wanted to let you know I do have a tutorial for how to make these design boards, and I'll link to those below in the description box. Okay, so I brought all my pieces out off of the board because there just wasn't enough room to work on the board, and this is really big block. So I've decided to just sew one row at a time instead of doing chain piecing where I would sew several rows at a time. So I'm just going to pull over one row and bring it down here and start piecing. After giving my pillow top one last press and measuring it, it's time to add my borders. I cut two 16.5 by 2.5 for the side borders, and then I cut two 20.5 by 2.5 for the top and bottom borders. Now I'm just going to add my two borders. I got the 16.5 and the 20.5. Put one on each side and one on the top and bottom.